Hello everybody and welcome to the SANS webcast titled HTCIA and Coins are pleased to present super timeline analysis. I am Alex Bass with the SANS Institute and I will be moderating this webcast. Today's featured speakers are Duncan Monkhouse, President of HTCIA, and Rob Lee, Curriculum Lead for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. Before I turn things over to Chris, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them by using the chat window at any time and we will answer them. Right now, I'd like to introduce our first featured speaker, Duncan Monkhouse. Duncan, would you like to take over, please?
Thank you, Alex. I would like to welcome you to the HTCIA portion of this webcast. SANS has been kind enough to allow me some time at the start to talk to you about the High Technology Crime Investigation Association, HTCIA. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Duncan Monkhouse, and I am this year's president of HTCIA. I've been a member of HTCIA since 2002 and have held a number of offices both at the chapter level and on the International Executive Committee. So what is HTCIA? The association started in Silicon Valley 25 years ago as a way for law enforcement and industry to get together and assist each other with a blossoming of crime that was occurring in the Bay Area related to computers. Since then, the association has grown and developed. We've recently restated our mission to provide education and collaboration to our global members for the prevention and investigation of high-tech crimes. So how are we meeting our mission, and what is high-tech crime? So we're a charitable foundation based in Sacramento, California. The association consists of 38 chapters. 2 of these are outside North America in Brasilia and Asia Pacific, based out of Hong Kong. There are 5 chapters in Canada: Atlantic Canada, Ottawa, Ontario, Western Canada, and British Columbia. The other chapters in the United States, with California having the most chapters. We also have 3 at-large chapters in Europe, Asia, and North America, for those members who are not geographically near a chapter. The association currently has over 3,200 members, making it the largest global organization of its kind. A large number of these members, like the chapters, are located in California. We recently started a student membership program that currently has over 200 members in 10 school charters. The student members have been increasingly involved in the conference that we hold as volunteers and also with a poster exhibition. So who can become a member of HTCIA? We accept government or private sector employees as well as academia. If you work in an area that deals with the latest gadgets and toys, then that's us. Computers, cell phones, tablets, GPSs, and the list goes on and on. Anything that has to do with something that's high-tech. So the membership do all sorts of really interesting types of cases, ranging from the mundane to the exciting. And so I highlight a couple of the exciting ones we've been involved with. I guess you can call homicide exciting, and serial killers. I won't bother with the mundane ones, but we do a wide range of different cases. Here's a couple of more examples that our members have worked on. And especially in the child exploitation case, it's nice that they can reach out to other members with expertise. So we cover a broad range, obviously, of investigations, and the members with a wide variety of expertise. And each year, HTCIA declares a case of the year in recognition of the case that sort of exemplifies what we stand for, or the work that our members have done. So what can you get for membership if you decide to join HTCIA? Well, the local chapters have meetings with expert speakers often. Often vendors will present with their latest tools. There are also joint events with other associations or vendors like this one. Local members meetings are usually free for members, with local training having a membership discount. HTCI International Office provides the membership with a listserv, information updates via Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. The website contains a speakers bureau for people who are willing to lecture on a variety of topics, and a forensic examiner locator if you require work done in a non-local jurisdiction. The association also provides many volunteer opportunities and places to earn CPE credits. Members can serve on local chapter boards or the International Executive Committee. They can assist at conferences or in association committees. Other choices are being involved in special projects that are sponsored by HTCIA. And the cost of all this? Most chapters' fees are less than $70 a year. Our main training event for HTCIA is the International Training Conference and Expo. This annual event alternates between the East and West Coast of the United States. This year, it was the West Coast turn, and the conference was in Indian Wells, California. Next year, in the East Coast, it will be in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The conferences are typically held between September and November. In addition to the main conference, a number of local chapters hold regional conferences of shorter duration. As you can see, our conferences, it's a 3-day conference. So let's talk about this year's conference. The photo shows a view of the resort. That's right, the resort where the conference was held in Indian Wells. For those who watch the Golf Channel, this year's Big Break show was held at this location. And yes, the golf courses were amazing. The International Training Conference is broken into a number of tracks, and there are lecture tracks and lab tracks. This year, there were 6 lecture tracks on topics that range from intellectual property investigations to e-discovery and a legal track. These sessions are in a classroom-style seating with an instructor, with sessions holding up to 45 students. There were 11 different time slots for the sessions, each one of an hour and a half. For the labs, there were 14 hands-on lab tracks. The sessions in these tracks were from 1.5 hours to all day in length. Some of the sessions were bring your own laptop, and some of the sessions the computers were provided. These labs provided a wide range of vendors in the field. One of the focuses of the conference is a showcase for the vendors in a setting that's vendor neutral. So you can go to a lab in the morning from Access Data, and in the afternoon a lab from Guidance. The next day you can check out a lab by Mobile Forensics, and then one by Celebrite. On day 3, maybe a lecture by SANS. But that's not all. That's just part of the education part of our mission. Now how about the collaboration part? To assist attendees with networking, we provide a number of social events and food, breakfast and lunches, that are included in the price of the conference. So list there of some of the social events that we have, discussion detail. So also this year we had the first ever HTCIA CRU Dataport Golf Tournament on the Sunday in Indian Wells. We have to use the golf tournaments, along with a movie night sponsored by Vound. There was an awards dinner on the Tuesday night celebrating our 25th anniversary, and also a vendor reception on the Sunday evening. So there's quite a few off-hour events outside of the regular conference time. The third part of the conference is the Expo. This is an area full of vendors allowing the attendees to meet face-to-face with the companies who provide the hardware and software that helps us with our investigations. This year there were some 50 vendors displaying in the Expo, and this slide shows their logos for all. So what does all this cost? Well, at this year's conference, the registration fee was under $500. The room rate at the resort was $103, and that included a great location, pool, free Wi-Fi, and parking. Due to the generosity of our vendors attending the conference, we were able to give away over $2,000 in free software to every attendee. What's not to like? Now then, next year we're going to the Hershey Lodge in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The Lodge is an easy drive from most main cities in the Northeast. We have a fantastic room rate of $108 per night, and that includes parking and Wi-Fi. The same committee is running the speakers and labs, so I'm expecting similar numbers for the lectures and labs in terms of content, all for around the same registration fee. To find out more about the association or the conference, please use the listed contact numbers or check on the websites. Thank you for your time.
everyone. Hi, this is Rod Lee here in Washington, D.C. On what day is today? Wednesday. I shouldn't really joke about that, but the real reason that I don't even know what day it is, and I have to do the obligatory showing of what I'm going to be talking about here to explain what is going on with me and why is it so incredible that I'm even here right now. So let me bring up a picture and show you what is dominating my world at this point. And then I'll go into tonight's discussion. So let me switch over to my window here. There it is. So last Thursday night, my wife, Melissa, gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy. And I'm really excited at this point. But I also am working on zero sleep. We're on this regimented, insane feeding schedule, feeding every 2 hours. So we just happened to feed right before this webcast, and we have to feed immediately afterwards again. So for anyone who's been through that, it's quite the process. So their names are Eliana and Connor, and I'm really proud. It's been a lot of work, but so far, really happy about that. So that's why I'm like, what day is it? Because they're 6 days old, and we finally got word from the pediatrician today that they've made the corner, because one was diagnosed with jaundice early on and had to be put under a light, and because they were very small. But so that's what's going on with me. So let me go back to our regular scheduled program and start talking about digital forensics. And yes, we kind of did know it happened around this point, and it was kind of a, well, we can't move it forward, and had a hard time really moving it back. So I asked my wife very nicely, I said, well, if we did end up, as long as we're not giving birth, would I have 2 hours to do this? She gave the approval, and so a round of applause for my very supportive wife of all my crazy geeky endeavors that I end up doing over the years. So who am I? With the SANS Institute, been with them for over 11 years at this point. Formerly AFOSI, formerly Air Force, at the 609th Information Warfare Squadron, worked in the intel community, and I also am currently starting my own business and just kicked off of working for Mandiant from that point. I was at the HTCIA conference that Duncan mentioned. It was a wonderful resort. Actually wish I'd stayed an extra day to take up some of that golf. So I think next year it's in Hershey, Pennsylvania, so definitely look up to joining at that point. So thanks to everyone joining tonight. Looks like we have quite a crew in here talking about the super timeline analysis that we're going to be accomplishing here at the that we will be accomplishing on tonight's SANS HTCI webcast. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out to you about tonight's webcast specifically is that we're truly trying to work and support the efforts of HTCIA in all the different chapters, not just here but around the world, in providing content, potential speakers, and if that's of interest to you, please email Deanna Boyden, whose email address is listed on the slide here, if you're interested in having SANS at your next event, or interested in talking to SANS about how to bring someone local, SANS instructor. It doesn't have to be about forensics, even if pen tests and some other things in there. We'd be glad to share. We have speakers everywhere from mentors all the way up to full certified instructors that are part of this huge community. And plus, we're hoping it will help drive your membership up as well on the HTCA side in order to expose our members, people who take SANS events, exposure to the benefits of joining HTCA. So to us, it's a win-win because we share a lot of the similar principles. Vendor neutral, believe in high ethical standards, prompt, doing the right thing when it comes to digital forensics and so forth. All right. Just a note, if you're just joining the webcast tonight, at this point, all chat messages, I can see them. So if you're including the person-to-person chat messages that are currently out there. So in order to be able to identify when questions are coming in, if you could, please keep the person-to-person chats to a minimum, or switch over to Skype, text message, Facebook, smoke signals, if you could during this point. That way I know if a message is coming in that is a question to me, about tonight's content, which leads me to the next point regarding the format that we're in here. This is the SANS Be Live portal. This is what we usually teach our live courses to. If you're signing up for 508 or 408 or one of the courses we teach at the SANS Institute, and you're doing it from home from usually 7 to 10. Now, if you've never seen this before, there are some, if you look up at the top underneath all the names, there's smiley faces, there's a hand clap, like a sick signal, and a thumbs down. There's also a hand raise up. Don't click on that because I hear a bunch of dings. But if you have a question, all you have to do is just type it in the bottom to the room so everyone in the room can see it, and I'll try to get to the questions as they come in. But if I ask a question to the audience, if it's something like, how many of you have done this, you know, what you could do is either click clap or the smiley face, and you'll be able to see, you know, who is has that effect or, you know, had that kind of problem that we're hopefully trying to solve here. Now on the slide that you see here in front of you, the community SANS folks are doing some pretty spectacular stuff at bringing the large conference level events for training to smaller communities. We've just released, and I think you're the second people on the planet to see this, our winter 2012 schedule, which includes some pretty interesting places. Vail, Colorado, we're going to be in Miami, and this is going to be in January. San Antonio, for those in DC and don't really want to travel to Arlington, we're in LA and also New York City. There are a lot smaller classes, and you know, my personal learning is increased when I have a smaller class instead of sitting in a room full of 100 people, 50 people. This usually average class size around 18, you know, and it really increases your one-on-one time with the instructor. So take a look at the community SANS portion of the events that are out there, community events via SANS for the smaller classes. And you can easily find them by just looking at the specific course you're looking for and seeing where the events are held, and look for something called SANS Community. And you definitely will be guaranteed those will be smaller events. So without further ado, why we're here tonight is this evening we will change the way you approach digital forensics forever. I've been doing timeline analysis for 10 years now, and we've definitely taken a turn over the past 2 years and have really rocketed the technology forward in terms of what we're able to do with timeline analysis. I'm going to go through several case examples tonight that are going to truly expand your amount of knowledge, and I've talked to people after being exposed to some of this technology that they have a hard time going back and remembering how to accomplish forensics before utilizing timeline analysis. You know, they said, well, we just pieced it together by hand. How did we do this before we had these wonderful tools in place? Just a reminder, where does this data sit in overall SANS digital forensics curriculum? For those of you who are familiar with the SANS digital forensics and incident response curriculum, on the right-hand side here, we usually recommend that all analysts, regardless of capability, and I actually have a slide that points to this as well, start in Windows in-depth forensic analysis. And it sounds like, well, I know Windows. We guarantee I'm going to have you walk out of that class feeling 100% challenged. Our second class that we have in order here is Advanced Computer Forensic Analysis and Incident Response. Timeline analysis is actually taught in 508. So this is not a beginner capability. So I would not usually advise beginners when they're just starting out, hey, you know, start doing that timeline stuff. Generally because they don't have enough experience to have it roll off their tongue. Different things in registry analysis, in prefetch, and what the recycle bin file system timestamps mean. So you actually have that literally in conversational forensics, that you don't need to reference a book to remember what the key item, what that key artifact actually means. That you automatically could just look at the, oh, I see a prefetch file, I immediately know that means what for evidence, evidence of what? What is that? What will that prove for you? And that's one of the reasons that we have that in the Advanced Computer Forensic Analysis. So it's our part 2 to our part 1 for 408. We also have network forensics, mobile device forensics, malware analysis, which is a really hot class right now. But one of the key things that we see in here for the digital forensics side is that we need to download in order to get timeline analysis to work is the SIFT workstation, which you can see linked to from the slide here. And we'll talk about that here initially, about what is a SIFT workstation and why is it currently the only thing out there pre-built with timeline analysis capability. Can everyone, I'm just trying to catch up on the messages here. Can everyone hear me okay? If you could do a or a hand clap, smiley face. Okay, just looking up and down here. Perfect. Is it from the time I asked that question to where I started seeing smiley faces, it was about 3 seconds. If you're experiencing greater delay than that, one of the things I would recommend is that this is being recorded, and you can come back and listen to it again. And when it's recorded, where it will sync better if you're having a major delay on your end. And if it's you suddenly lose sound or something like that, if someone could please let me know so we could see that. Also, please everyone, if you could keep your chats to a minimum, no person-to-person chats, just so I could identify any questions that are going on. So just call out to Kevin and Wanson and everyone else who's chatting back and forth. If you please, I hate to be a stickler on that. Everyone who's a moderator can read all of your back and forth. So I understand you're trying to say hi to your friends, but if you could please switch that over to your another favorite application, that'd be great, just so I can answer questions as they come in. I appreciate that. I hate to be rude. All right, so let's talk about the SIFT workstation. What is the SIFT workstation and why is it so important for us to be able to use? First of all, the SIFT workstation, I basically want to point out to you, is currently the only capability built into it with a full timeline capability pre-built into it. Nothing else out there. From FTK to ENCASE, nothing has what we're going to be able to show you today built into it. Now, I'm not trying to compete with those. In fact, when we started the timeline analysis technology, we never really we assumed at some point FTK or an ENCASE or something like that will build it into it like what we're showing you here, but we're definitely a cutting edge technology that's only found so far in the SIFT workstation. And it's only not a SIFT workstation thing. You could actually download it and install it separately, but if you download the SIFT workstation, it's already pre-built and ready to go for you. But it's a VMware appliance, it's ready to tackle forensics, and has a cross-compatibility between Linux and Windows. And I'm going to be able to show you some how we're going to be using that tonight in here. All the tools you need to have are actually already pre-configured. Basically, think of it as ENCASE or FTK, but free. I have a lot of individuals out there that have switched to the SIFT workstation as one of their primary deep dive analysis workstations. And this is not something you're just doing a superficial, do a quick, graphics, email check. This is when you have a really hard case and you need to dig in deep quickly in order to be able to see what's going on. And that's what those individuals are currently using. Uh-oh, sound just got muffled. Sound is better now. And we're back. Weird. Okay, sorry about that if something happened. There's a ton of capabilities in the SIFT workstation. So I'm going to switch over to the SIFT workstation so you can see it. And I want to see how long also it takes to switch over, by the way, as well when I'm switching to the SIFT workstation. I'm going to also close out some of my other windows here. All right, so here's the SIFT workstation. And currently it's basically an operating system, but with a ton of forensics tools already pre-built into it. Now, when you download it for the first time, you'll notice that there is a SIFT cheat sheet that will have a lot of the commands we're going to be going through in it tonight. The cheat sheet is basically located on the desktop itself. I'm not going to open it up for now, but if you go in there, it has memory analysis in it. It has how to do file system forensics. It has a lot of different forensic goodness. We also have a specific log to timeline, which is for timeline analysis cheat sheet, also on the desktop. So in both of these are the locations where I'd say to go afterwards if you're forgetting how to use the specific command, where you could go to see how the command is actually built when you are typing it in via the command line. Now, one of the things that's fairly frustrating for individuals initially when you start working with the SIFT workstation is that it is command line driven, basically meaning, even though a lot of people are Unix purists are probably croaking a little bit that I just call it a command line, but it's requires a lot of typing. And this is not very GUI-tastic. You're not going to see a lot of push the red button. This requires you to see the command, know exactly what you want to do, and be able to pull out the specific information that we're going to examine here. Now I'm going to switch back to my regular system, and I'm going to show you my entire desktop because I want to show you one of the things that you can do automatically when you are using the SIFT workstation. Now I'm going to share my entire desktop here. All right, so here's my entire desktop. I'm going to type in SIFT workstation into my Windows button of power down here at the bottom. And when I do so, it's automatically networked where I see there's a cases directory and an MNT directory. Now the case Test 1, 2. Can you hear me now? All right, awesome. Not sure what happened there. So here, I'll just go back and where the MNT directory is where we will see the Windows mount points. Currently, there's nothing in there that we're examining on the system. We'll be mounting something in here, and as a result of that, we're going to be able to identify where the files are. Now, to give an example of that, how that works, in my Forensics Challenge directory, I'm going to simply mount in read-only mode using some of the commands I teach in our advanced class. To mount a DD image into the Windows mount point. And what this does, and I'm not going to go through the command because that would be an entire other session here. This is also in the cheat sheet of how to mount disk images, including EO1s, AFF images, so given case formats, it'll show you how to mount those as well. But you need to now see under CD under MNT Windows mount and do a long file listing. You'll notice all of the files and folders that you typically see in the root directory of a Windows system. Again, moving back to my Windows mount point, if I all the files and folders from my host system to my SIFT workstation. Now, in here, I cannot create a new folder because this is in read-only mode. So it allows me to be able to directly examine the files and folders that are in here. All right. More information on the SIFT workstation is actually covered in our Forensics 508 class. Now, I've slowed down speaking intentionally, hoping that might help out with the lag issues that we're seeing here. I'm blaming myself essentially. So I might increase the pace here if I can, but I will try to monitor if the mic goes out from the server. All right. Now I'm going to go back to the slides here. So the SIFT workstation can be downloaded from the following website you see on the screen here. When you initially download it, we do recommend that you increase your memory from the current 1 gigabyte of memory to something that is able to handle based off of your system configuration. Also, the number of CPUs that you currently have is set at 1, but you could also increase that. The login and password is SANS forensics, and the password is forensics. And to do anything useful, you usually have to run the sudo su command, which will elevate your privileges to root. It's equivalent to thinking of it as like run as on your system. Can you comment on the 6 terabyte virtual disk file? Are you talking about when you unzip it, you see it's 6 terabytes or something? Your WinZip program or your 7-zip program, or possibly third option, is you're trying to unzip it within Windows. If you do those and you're using older versions, some of the older versions, and I know Windows Zip does this, it tries to copy the entire unzipped file into memory first, and it creates an overflow condition. Try unzipping it using 7-zip or downloading 7-zip initially. It's free, it works quite well. Instead of using the current tool that you're using, you're basically experiencing a bug in the tool that you didn't know was there. And it's usually dealing with the fact that I am handing out fairly large files. Joe Garcia asked, will the SIFT work with VirtualBox? Yes. One of the downloads that's available to you is an installation ISO. So you could install this in any virtualization platform of your choice by pointing it at the ISO and installing the SIFT workstation locally into that system. You could also do this on a standalone workstation. If you want to create a dedicated SIFT workstation, you could use the ISO image instead of the pre-built VMware images that are there. Other questions before we move forward? Now the SIFT workstation, yeah, parallels the same thing. An ISO image, just use the ISO and install it into your virtual platform of choice. Cool. All right. Other things I already showed you, you can access from the Windows virtual machine. You can access from your shared folder settings. Another thing that's great about VMware is literally I could drag and drop from my desktop into the virtual machine and have it no problem there at that point. All right. So let's get into a timeline. And this, I actually was just working on this today while the kids were sleeping. So I just updated with this, some of the latest information that we had here. So no one's ever seen these slides before, so this is a brand new cut of the deck that I had been using before. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is this is a timeline. And I created this slide and basically to show you what your end goal will be. Now to show this a little bit better, I actually already have it in an Excel spreadsheet, but I first want to show you here on the slide, I've included a key which shows you everything in red is execution, everything in blue is a USB key being inserted, everything in green is a file being opened, and everything in yellow is a file being copied. So you can identify just by the color swaths without looking at the text where a USB key is inserted. Here, files are copied to it, files are opened. Second USB key inserted, files are copied to it. We see execution of programs and files that are being opened. And again, this is in date from newest to oldest, so the most recent activity is going to be up here at the top. Let me show you a little bit closer examination of this, because this is where we want to end up at the end. And this is the reason why I initially show this to you, is I'm trying to really get to the point as why do we do all this work to do timeline analysis? And the main point here is when we start examining across the top, we have the date, the artifact involved, the action that's associated with the artifact, and then the source of the evidence itself. Now, this is what I can, where I usually end up when I'm about to write a forensic report. I'm getting it down to just the nuts and bolts related to the actual event that occurs. Now, up near the top, notice we'll just take a look at this green line here across the top. We see that F:/TiVo Research Confidential Backup 2 was last opened at that time, at 23:27 and 02 seconds. Also notice that WordPad was executed last at the same time. Now remember, an executable file, it's almost, when you start really analyzing how things are built, think of executable files as verbs, and think of files as nouns. So typically you don't have a file just create itself or just show up on the system. And maybe Explorer is manipulating it, maybe Word is doing something, maybe someone's using another program to manipulate it. But usually you see a manipulation of an executable, and then you see the resultant file that's going to be the result of that. Now take a look, and the most important piece of this is the source data. This is where, when I'm writing my report, I say, how do I know that this is a fact that I'm showing here? Across the top here, I actually have 3 locations in my system: the shortcut file modification time, the intuser.dat, recent docs key, and the history index.dat files all show the same overlapping information that points to TiVo Research Confidential Backup 2 that DOC was open at 23:27:02 seconds. Now typically you have to pull this out by examining each individual element by itself, and that's what we're going to be getting away from here when you're doing timeline analysis. That actually is going to be self-generated, and it will be on separate lines, but when you sort based off of time, it'll all be around 23:27:02 seconds. And you'd be able to combine that into a single line saying, okay, we have 3 pieces of evidence that prove that that file was opened at that one time. This is also what I call the anti-forensics smoking gun. That there's so much data that's manipulated on a system as a result of user-level activity that in order for someone to be really sneaky, they have to cover up not just one artifact, but in many cases 3 or 4 that all point to the same fact. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's a lot of stuff you have to worry about if you're trying to be a bad guy doing anti-forensics. What opened up our TiVo Research Confidential Backup 2.doc? Notice contextually we get the WordPad being executed. We also see that there's 2 sources of data for WordPads being executed. We see the user assist registry key, and we also see the prefetch. And again, the overlapping data here is what I'm getting at. Now, there's a question from Richard. Do you have sources for USB plugins that go beyond first and last times? Yes, I do. But you actually have to do like full USB key analysis. It's usually not caught during timeline analysis, but you could usually trace it back to shortcut files, the volume serial number, volume name, drive letter, things like that. But in this case here, we're basically looking at just the first time of insertion based off of the setup API log file. Now, if it was the second time it was inserted, or the last time it was inserted, I guarantee that evidence would be originating from another location. Now, on the SANS Forensics blog, if you simply Google SANS Forensics and also USB key forensics, there's several how-tos that I've created in PDF forms that step an individual through all the different locations you need to do by hand to be able to do full USB key analysis. The hard part here is, let's assume, and this is where a lot of people really trip up on USB key analysis, let's assume you had over 100 keys on your machine. How do you know which one is the one you need to focus in on? It's almost, you can't analyze every single one of them individually. It's almost, it's overwhelming. So let's assume you saw, okay, we're looking for anyone who manipulated TiVo Research, and immediately before TiVo Research showed up on the system on an F drive, we end up seeing a USB key was inserted with a specific serial number. And it's like, okay, maybe I need to do analysis for the specific serial number associated with that key. So that's one of the ways that we're going to be able to truly help out ourselves with timeline analysis, and because it will give you the pointer that says I need to do a more media analysis against this USB key that I see that will show up in my timeline as a result here. Test. Can everyone hear me still? Is that a RedRipper plugin that gets it? No, we're going to show you something else that will be able to show that here for us this evening. All right, so let me go back to my slides. So that's our final timeline. What is the first thing we look at, which is our first timeline? And this is where it gets ugly. I initially build up your confidence. Oh, that's going to be awesome. I cannot wait to get there. Then I said, well, you don't quite get there without a little bit of work. Everything requires work when you're doing anything in forensics, but this is greatly going to enable us to reduce the amount of time that when we do analysis, that it will help out. Now I'm going to switch over again to what the raw timeline output file is going to look like. And again, this is what we usually start with, and I can show you how to create it. Creating it's easy, but I want to show that was the final product. Let me go back to the beginning. It's almost like we're watching Star Wars or something that will start at the end and move back to the beginning to really understand how did we get there. So I'm going to go back to my Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to switch over to my second spreadsheet, which is my raw timeline. All right. So in my raw timeline, I see the dates and times, something called MAC-B, which stands for Modified Access Change Time, and B is birth date for creation time. Our source type, our short entry description, our file name that's associated with it, and of course we see our metadata inode number at the end. Now notice here, on some of this data, the data here for a shortcut file, notice it points to f:/secret.zip. That's of the target information. What does the artifact come from? You see the file name here. That is origination from the file secret.lnk. Another good example of this is here we see a website that was visited. Notice it was Internet Explorer is the source type, but the file that contains that information is this index.dat file. So here when we add all of this data into our overall timeline, we're able to see all of the specific locations in our system and what their data points to, whether a web link, a shortcut file location, a file, a recycle bin information, whatever it is we're looking there. In some cases it's file system information, some of it's shortcut files, registry information, but it's all across the board here. Event logs is another one that we're seeing. Let me show one from a registry key. Here's nt-user key for registry files that are in here as well. Is the B time the same as the MFT time? No, the B time stands for file birth date, and we'll come back to that in a second because that gets fairly confusing here, especially if you're an encased user, because they decided to rename things as MACE. Unfortunately, that's not the right way the rest of the world treats the C timestamp when it comes to file systems. So in order not to have a doctorate degree come up and challenge you on your expertise, you have to understand that the C timestamp we don't live only in a Windows world. C timestamp initially existed on the Unix side as metadata change time. C stands for change time. They didn't have a creation time initially on Unix file systems. They only started showing up in Unix file systems as a result of ext4 file system coming out on Linux side. The creation timestamp did exist on FAT and TFS for a while, but in order to differentiate it in the timeline analysis, let's say you're analyzing a mobile device that is ext4 based, well, how do you know what C is? You don't want to be constantly flipping back and forth. So we label C as change time for metadata, B is file birth date. Is non-user activity also noted in your data? Yeah, it is. And we'll come back to that in a second, how that's going to fit together. But I just want to show you, here's how much raw data there is. Now I'm going to show you, this is a timeline generated for a single day. Starting at column number 1, going all the way down, I have about 2,400 lines of data for the data that I was just simply analyzing for this one day. In many cases, if I'm analyzing an entire system across multiple dates, I might have 100,000 entries or more. it becomes overwhelming quick. And I'm doing that intentionally here to show you that we need to have some sort of really decent filtration mechanism in here to be able to answer the questions that we need answered. All right, so let's go back to the beginning here, which is, how long has this been around? You know, this looks cool. How do we, that looks like a very manual process now at this point, but is there a way we, you know, how did this ever, was ever born? We've been doing timeline analysis ever since 1999 when the Coroner's Toolkit was born, and we had the initial MacTime tool that was released with it. The problem with the Coroner's Toolkit was that we couldn't run it on a live system, specifically meaning that you know, during instant response, I wanted to gather a timeline to help aid the analysis of artifacts left by hackers, and I needed to be able to run this from a boot disk, not boot disk, but a instant response disk on a machine. So I rewrote some of the capability for TCT and called that MacDaddy. And so a combination of the Sleuth Kit, TCT, MacDaddy, for many years we're mainly doing file system timeline only. Starting in 2008, as you know, more people started getting more into registry, I asked Harlan Carvey to, he had a time generation tool for the registry that I introduced him to the body file format and asked him to rewrite his tool so it would output in body file format, which he did, which became a tool called RegTime. And so we could now include registry data as well as file system data into the timeline. The thing we were missing though, and this was annoying, is that there's a lot of time data that's in event logs and user assist and index.dat files. And so a really smart individual, Kristen Johnson, approached me back in 2009 asking for if I had any decent ideas for a research project. I've mentioned this idea to multiple people in the past, which I said, what would be really great is if someone takes the time to create an artifact-based timeline analysis system, and I sketched it out. And Kristen and I have been working and sharing ideas back and forth for the past 2 years, but we initially sketched out 5 different capabilities: recycle bin, event logs, user assist data, the registry, and there's one other in there, 5 artifacts in total. But we've increased it to about 50 artifacts at this point that are in the latest release of the Log to Timeline tool. But at that point, we still needed 3 independent capabilities to generate a timeline, which was the file system timeline generation, registry timeline, and then we had artifact. And until this year, we haven't had a single tool combine all of those elements into a single automated processing capability that will generate a timeline that would be effective for use in a normal case. And that's where we started to call this, instead of a regular timeline, we have renamed this and called it the super timeline, because it includes everything of all possibility on the system. Now we're probably about 50% there of all the artifacts that might be included, but and that's where we've actually had third-party researchers start feeding us plugins for the tool that will help their cases out, so that it would help the overall project out by having additional individuals write modules for it. So what knowledge do you need to make use of when you're using timeline analysis? Now this is one of those, so, you know, if someone's going to use smelling salts, this is exactly where that's going to be. This is not a tool that I recommend any beginner to use. I usually recommend that someone within 2 to 3 years experience is best suited to use this tool. Mainly for the reason that it requires in-depth knowledge of the file system, and I'll go through what that means. Windows artifacts. You need to have a full knowledge of the majority of Windows artifacts down to exactly what they mean. What does the modification time of a shortcut file tell you? What does the creation time of a $i file in the Windows Vista or Windows 7 recycle bin file tell you? What does the, how is the system restore point created, and what's in the rp.log file? These are things that you immediately need to be able to rattle off in order for you to really make the greatest use of this, because all you will see in your output at this point is no heuristic interpretation. It'll just show you rp.log file created. And you're like, well, I have no idea what that file is. And you would have to figure that out on your own unless you had that experience already pre-built, ready to go. The last piece of the puzzle that I recommend that people have is a full understanding of registry forensics at this point with Windows. So these three skills are basically tied at the hip together, and you have to be able to recognize the level of experience you need to be able to bring to the table to pull this out. Now, to that end, one of the things I really emphasize and get down on some of the automated tools is that specifically I see a lot of people when they're handling cases, they'll go and recover a bunch of artifacts, and it's equivalent to dumping a bunch of puzzle pieces onto your desk and saying, okay, I solved my case. All you've done at that point is recovered a bunch of stuff. And it looks like it's all interrelated. You might see a reference to an F drive, you might see this, you might see that. But that is the start of a case. You need to fit together, I think USB key was inserted. Can I go prove that? How would I prove that? I see a file of interest that I'm looking at here. How do I prove that? Where do I prove that? When I'm doing it, the full analysis that I'm going to be taking care of. So analysis is truly required. You actually have to just not only recover the elements, you have to really think through how they're integral to one another. It's that noun and verb analogy I'm saying. If something was modified, is it modified via another program? Was it natively modified? Was it intentionally modified? How would you be able to show that is definitely the case? And this is where the next slide comes into picture here. Now this is what we cover in 408, which is not our beginner class. This is truly an intermediate class. But everything on the slide, basically from user comms, file download, program execution. So I'll initially show you, for example, program execution. So what I mean by evidence of, if someone wants to be able to prove that a program was executed, where are all the artifact locations that you could check to be able to prove that a program was truly executed? From the user assist, last visited, most recent used registry key, the run MRU key, the MUI cache, Windows 7 jump list, the prefetch, and services. There may be more, and I know there's more out there, but again, this is what we cover. This is our core level of understanding that we have in our system. So what ends up being interesting here is that when I ask a lot of trained analysts, I say, well, how would you be able to prove that if a program was actually executed within your data? Sometimes they look at me blankly, and they haven't. I said, well, can you name at least one or two that you'd be able to show an application was executed? And you sometimes hear the crickets chirp. And I said, well, what about registry? Let's just narrow it down. Anything in the registry will show evidence of execution of a specific program. And then they think about it. I said, well, I think there's something in there, but they don't really name off immediately. He says, well, I know the user assist is able to do that. Where is that key located? And that's where you hear the silence again. Well, you see where this is really hard now. Manually, you'd have to go through there and identify where's the user assist key, what is the data in it I'm looking for, what is the program name, instead of having something automate this, put it in contextual format, temporal based, and then be able to look at what else was affected as a result of the execution of one program. Another big question I usually get is, how do we know that the user intentionally opened up a file? Well, here's all the locations that you'd be able to prove that evidence of file opening or creation. The recent files list, the Office recent files, shellbag entries, link file analysis, jump list, prefetch files, and of course your index.dat file entry, not the HTTP file entry. A lot of people forget that if you're using Explorer to open up files, it actually records the fact that you did that in our Explorer history.index.dat file. So for all your Firefox users out there, if you've never cleared your index.dat file in Internet Explorer, guess what they just recorded for the who knows how long, is all of your file access through explorer.exe on your desktop. People forget that. So all the advanced users, you routinely, unless you're paranoid and going and clearing all of your history files, that's usually a treasure trove of every single time you open up a file, I'll be able to see exactly when you opened it up. So this is the baseline. This is the baseline of where you would be able to prove data. File knowledge. You could go through. I'm not going to be able to just go through each one of these because that's what we base the entire 408 class on. What is the location? What does it mean? How is it going to be able to be used to you? One of the things I really like to point out is like physical location. How would you be able to prove where the person was based off the utilization of their PC? What about USB key usage? The browser usage. How would we be able to show all the different elements of the browser usage? So all these things combined is you'll be able to now do evidence of program execution, file download, etc. How did the thing get to the machine? How did it execute? Where did it come from? That's what we're looking for when you're doing proper analysis. And this is the baseline information that's necessary in order to get to timeline analysis, because if you're not immediately recognizing a lot of these artifacts, timeline analysis is going to be fairly difficult today. Now 2 years from now, as we build more heuristics into this, it's going to be a night and day result. So remember this slide here in a second, because when we come back to it, you will notice a lot of the elements that we're examining here as a result of this slide are going to show up as an artifact plugin for our log to timeline tool. So let's first talk about MAC-B and what that means by the file system. Now, modified, accessed, change time, birth date. And it's always good to know what how the time value is stored. And this is where I see many analysts forget, for example, the FAT file system is stored in local time, not in universal time coordinated. Where this trips people up is if you have a last modification time to a file, and it writes it at, say, 4 p.m., if you change your time zone on your machine, it'll always list that time as 4 p.m. It could be 4 p.m. anywhere on the planet. It does not change relative to the time zone. So it'll say 4 p.m., but it'll be anywhere within that 24-hour period on that specific date in question. Let's assume you have the file system information that may list the time zone that's associated with it. That might be the only way to draw a deep connection to when that file was actually last modified, but it's not built into the file system itself, like UTC timestamps will be. That your time zone that's displayed, if I said something is 4 p.m. and I write it to my disk, if I change my time zone to Pacific time from Eastern, it'll now display it as 1 p.m. As my last modification time. And that's one of the benefits between local time and UTC, is that it will keep track of the exact time in the world on this planet as it's spinning when something was last opened up and accessed. Now, a question I usually ask individuals that are interviewing with me is time resolution, because a lot of people forget, because they're so focused on the seconds, because all of your forensic programs only resolve to the second, forget that NTFS actually resolves to 100 nanoseconds field. Kind of interesting if you think about it, but when you're looking for evidence of time stomping and other items like this, those also will stomp to the second, not to the nanosecond. So as a result, you'll have nanoseconds fields all show up as zeros instead of having it be a delta of, like watching Michael Phelps swim. That nanoseconds in which he won gold by. I mean, it literally is incredible when you think about it. But there's also a lot of native files in the system also have nanoseconds fields as being zero, so it's not your end-all be-all for making that detection, but it's little items like that that you could use to help narrow your focus into where you think things might have been time-stomped. Also note here that on the FAT file system, you don't have access to time, you only have the access date. This is, again, a lot of people get confused here, as when a file from a FAT file system is written into an NTFS system, in many cases, if it's inheriting the properties from one to the other, it might look off. When you open up a shortcut file, or when you open up a file from a FAT file system, a shortcut file is going to be created that's going to stamp the time in UTC time based off of what it thinks the time zone is. And it will list it as midnight and give it a time even though there's officially no time associated with it. And it throws people off when you're doing analysis because it shows a time, all of your tools show a time, so what's the deal? But in reality, there's no timestamp at all associated with access date. In fact, it's not even listed there. It's your tool that's adding this additional time in there. So it's good, and we cover this in depth in 508. I mean, this is just one short slide to be able to give you a hint of why are there 4 timestamps and which file systems list all 4 timestamps. But birth date is the time of file creation. Now here's a quiz for you. On a Windows NTFS system, on a Windows NTFS system, when would you see, under what circumstance would you see a modification time occur prior to the file being created. How is that possible? That you have the M time show up before the birth date. Yeah, exactly. And someone's saying here, it could be extracted, it could be copied, and those are the things you have to remember. You have to watch how the file system does copies and moves. It's very, very critical here because in many cases, the modification time will be inherited from the original location. And the files created is not the time that the file was actually born ever. It's when it was initially created in that local volume. Now, if you create a new copy of a file, meaning you have two new files, it automatically will create a brand new file, even on the same volume, because you have two copies of the same file. So basically, you're allocating a new master file table entry as a result of that. So there's a lot of different ways that you'd be able to see this. So just keep that in mind. Like just because you see it does not mean that file time stuffing occurred. It's a native artifact that exists when you're examining your timeline itself. All right. Here is, in order to be able to show how this works, I've put together a couple slides here that will show the majority of the Windows timestamps via the Windows NTFS standard information time. Since we're mainly dealing with NTFS file systems for 90% of what we do, like what happens when a file is deleted, created, modified, file access. Now notice here on file access, you just open up a file, the access timestamp will change, but notice it says no change on Vista Windows 7. Why is there no change on Vista Windows 7? Exactly. It's turned off by default. Now, does that mean that the access time will never update when it's turned off? Exactly. You have to be careful because if you're creating a file, notice the access time is going to be stamped. If you copy a file, access time stamp, stamped. If you move a file, stamped. It doesn't mean it's entirely turned off. It's only turned off if you're simply accessing the file. But if you're creating, copying, or moving a file from one volume to another, it will stamp the new access timestamp. So kind of, interesting thing there, that if you actually have it turned off, it gives you a little bit more of a knowledge as if it was a local file move versus a volume file move. Because if the access timestamp does not change, and if you have a file system access timestamps turned off, you could make this differentiation between local and volume. Now, I haven't seen too many cases I've had to use this on yet, but there was one. It was a inappropriate use of the internet case in which the suspected child pornography was involved. They wanted to know where he copied files to, and I was able to, since it was a Windows 7 system, I was able to assess that the files were moved from a USB key to the local machine based off of the access timestamp being up to date, most recent. The access timestamp had a time today, whereas both modification time and the creation time had gone back further in time. And since access timestamp had been turned off and the file accessed couldn't have created that as a result, we knew the files existed on a remote drive, either a network share or a USB key or a USB device like a hard drive, and they ended up doing an additional search, specifically looking for it, and they ended up finding it. And that's where they made the files copied from, just based off of just some short information that we're seeing here. Now, all right, another pop quiz. On a average Windows NTFS file system, how many total timestamps exist? Oh, come on, someone always says 42. 16, 8, 12. All right. The average is, well, the at minimum is 8. Average is 12. And the reason why the average is 12 is we have an additional set of timestamps that are found in the file name attribute in NTFS. But on most Windows 7 systems, it natively creates two file name attributes, one for the 8.3 file name as well as one for the long file name. XP didn't do this. They only created usually one for the additional file name in long only until the 8.3 was needed for FAT file system or something like that where it's being copied over to. So it usually accepts the answers between 8 and 12 that you'll see, but it could be more that will contain the timestamps. But notice what happens here is that we have, because of the timestamps, you compare the previous chart and this one, that we see file creation, file copy, move, and local volume move all are going to be bundled into the same box that we see of files created. Now the reason why this is important is that when we start examining our file name timestamps compared to our standard information timestamps is what Explorer shows. File name timestamps aren't really shown by any program that's out there. You have to really dig for it. But why this is potentially useful for you is that under the creation, you might be able to see evidence of file system backdating. So the backdating that does occur, hold on, I'm taking a drink. So the backdating that does occur would only affect the standard information timestamps. Why? There's no Windows 32 API call that I'm aware of that is able to do direct manipulation of the $ file name attributes. Someone would have to create a library function call in order to be able to easily manipulate that. But no one, as far as I know, has created that yet as a part of anti-forensics. So some pretty interesting things that we're taking a look at here. All right, let's move forward. So some general Windows creation time rules. First of all, modification date will stay the same if a file is copied or moved, always. The creation date and time, it depends on if the file was copied or moved. The creation date will remain unchanged if it's a move from a volume to volume or a directory to directory. The creation date will be updated to a current time if it's copied to a volume to volume or from directory to directory. Now, if you think about that, this will make a lot of sense. If you're copying a file instead of moving it, you're creating a new file which contains the same data. That's why the creation time is now updated to local time. So that's where we end up seeing the the total amount of timestamps that are going to be adjusted there. All right, so let's get to some time rule exceptions here that will occur that we'll see things will be out of place. Applications will change this. Anti-forensics will change this. The rules I put forward there are the native rules, but things could create exceptions for that, and these are the things that you create exceptions for. Archiving, scanning from AV. So, while we try to hold these, as hard rules, there are things that will create default exceptions. It doesn't mean you can't trust the timestamps. It just means you need to be aware, did a archiving tool exist on the system when you're trying to run WinZip? Do you see WinZip in your timeline right before you see the extraction of a file? All right. So when we read our timeline, and this we're going to get into the creation of the timeline here. I'm going to go through several examples at the end here to show you how this fits together. Make sure you read line by line because of the contextual information that could be surrounding the event. Look for similar items that can be grouped together as a result of that. And then also look for similar items grouping together. It says user assist, password changing, program installation, or noticeable hacker activity or bad guy activity on the system. I apologize, my dog is going a squeaker toy here. Hold on. Here I thought I was going to have problems with kids. So, all right. So log the timeline. And again, in the longer version of this, we go through this a lot more in depth than when we're teaching the full class. We almost spend a full day on timeline analysis. And we're only getting to the quick and dirty here in our session. Sorry, I got another drink. All right, so log the timeline is what Kristen created based off of a discussion that I had with him. And it's a front-end tool to the overall input file module, which is going to read the specific log file in general. We have an output module, which will allow us to convert our data into different fields. And then we're going to be able to point it through a front end. Now this looks very generic, says, okay, this is just general design quality stuff here. But here's how all this fits together. The artifact modules that log the timeline will be able to automatically parse for you. And this is kind of like, when you're looking at FTK, well, parse and index that file. This is everything that will automatically parse and input data into your timeline. In addition to the file system, which is already in there, it'll do Apache log files, Chrome, all your event logs, EXIF data. Now this is kind of an interesting one because most files on a system will have EXIF data, which is internal metadata about a file, including executable files. Executable files will show their compile times. Pictures will show the date taken. Microsoft Office documents will show the date last printed. There's over 500 different file types that are currently have metadata associated with internal to them, and the EXIF module here will take care of them all because it's based off of the EXIF tool, which is a wonderful program if you've never played around with it before. Highly recommend that you download it because it'll eat anything at this point. If it's a movie, it's a picture, if it's an executable file, PDF, docx, PPT, anything you throw at it, it's able to parse and pull up the metadata associated with the file. Firefox history files. And for those of you who have FTK DUR listing from FTK Imager, it'll input that. Generic Linux log files, Internet Explorer history, IIS log files, the NTFS changelog. So for those of you who know about the NTFS changelog and where that exists, it'll parse the data from that changelog. Your McAfee log files, which you actually just received from someone in the community, 6 additional McAfee EPO log file format types that will automatically pull out. So if you have McAfee EPO installed on your enterprise environment, automatically pull out the log files from the local host and input it into your timeline. Your file system for the NTFS MST files. Continuing forward, your NT-user registry file. So this what will accomplish here, it will accomplish the majority of what RegRipper already does for you. Pulls out user assist, the recent docs, all the major elements that RegRipper does, automatically pulls them out based off of time and shows you the last write time of a registry key and what the data was for that key. I won't show you all the elements. It's still, media analysis, you need to do that, but it'll show at least the last search term. It'll show you the last recent doc for a specific file type on the system. Office 2007 documents are parsed. If you have network capture files, it'll slurp in PCAP files, PDF metadata. It'll automatically interpret your prefetch directory for the last time of execution, the recycle bin, restore points, your SAM hives, your security hive files, your setup API log files for Windows XP. We're still working on Windows 7. Your software hives, Skype databases, Flash cookie files, Squid access logs, Linux log files, system hive files, and we have almost there volatility memory output, shortcut files, and additional 2 Windows log files here. So we are a lot of the different elements that are associated with artifacts that we generically end up having to parse by hand are automatically parsed into the log the timeline tool. The output modules. So when we created this, we wanted it to be future-proofed. Instead of tying it to a specific output file format, that was also written as a modular output. So you could include your own output files. For example, one of the output files that you could put it out to is XML format, or CSV, SQLite, or potentially you want something that is able to be slurped in by ArcSight. If you have an ArcSight thing that is able to help you with event viewing, it'll automatically export it to that. So you have some capability here. Now the default one I export it to is usually CSV format. And that's where I do my hardcore work. But we know that in the future we actually want to put this and slurp this into a database for a heuristic GUI to eventually sit on top of this that will allow us to do a lot more scalable research and analysis when we're doing our examinations. And you'll see immediately when I do my examples here where we need to head to, but right now we're still focusing in more on the input modules then the database analysis piece of this. All right. So how does log to timeline work? It's actually quite simple. So you will do a couple examples here in just a few minutes. But you run the log to timeline tool, giving it a time zone. You give it the artifact type, and then you give it the file name of that artifact and where your output file is. You can set your output file type as well, to be doing -O, and say what is your output. Otherwise, it'll default to the MACTIME body file or CSV file type. If you want a log file output, it would be able to write it there. -W is your results file. It'll also do recursive mode. So if you point it at a directory, it'll start at the top directory and recurse into that directory, looking at all the elements for that specific module to be able to be pulled out. The -P is it will run a preprocessor that'll search through the suspect drive and extract needed information. And we'll come back to this in a second, what the preprocessors here will do for us. But basically, it'll allow you to do Windows XP versus Windows 7. It'll only run those artifacts that exist for that specific operating system layout. The time zone chart is listed here to input specifically which time zone you need for your command line that we were just building from the slide previous. So here's some simple examples. I'm not going to go each one of these of how to build these commands, but basically for IE history, if you just want to pull a example of IE history, you can point it using the -F IE history, where's your index.dat file, and then write where's your output file going to be located. Here's some more examples here. Now the reason I'm kind of going through this because I'm going to get to some demos here that'll make this a little bit easier to run, but I wanted to leave these examples in our slides so later if you're going through this webcast and you wanted to specifically say, well, I want to see that one example again, you'd be able to pause it on the slide or look at the PDF and be able to examine the contents of it. All right. So toward automation, here's the log to timeline module list. Now, on log to timeline, you can run it with -P, which is run preprocessor, recurse on a directory, and then say this is a Windows XP machine, set a time zone, and point it at the mount points of your Windows XP DD image that's mounted on your machine, or E1 image. And then your output file will be your CSV file format that you're looking at here. Now the modules that are already pre-built for you, say if you just want web history, you'd be able to do that. Windows 7, Windows XP, if you don't want it to do the registry hides, it won't do that. But we do Windows 7, Windows XP. Windows 7 also works very well against Windows Vista machines if you end up encountering those. The output is going to be in a CSV file format by default. Now what you see on this slide is the elements that I feel are required. All of these will initially show, but I usually, when I generate my output timeline, I usually hide everything that's in black. I don't need to see the time zone for every single artifact, or the source, or the type, the user, the host. All I want to see is the date, time, what the MAC meaning is by files, the source type, the short entry, the file name, and the inode. All right, so given that, basically this really helps us do a little bit of narrowing here when we're creating our examples for our timeline outputs. Now, how do we reduce the data? Now, this is going to be a second tool called L2T, log to timeline process. You point it at your CSV body file and say you only want to search for data on a specific date. It'll help you reduce your overall 100,000 line timeline and just show you a timeline just for that date in question. You also can use, and we're going to show you several different examples here for doing whitelisting of files. So it define known good entries. So if you want to exclude specific types of data from your output, you can say, I don't want to see that anymore. Temporary internet files, I do this all the time. I do not, there's too many of them. So I say, first, eliminate that. I just want to see everything but the temporary internet files on a Windows system. So you can include the keywords of things that you don't want to include in your output. This would be a single entry per line in your output file. Well, what if the opposite occurs? What if I'm only interested in certain elements from that timeline on a specific day? Then I do -K keyword file, which will show you, say I'm only interested in user assist data from a specific day, then I'd be able to examine the content from that for that one system there. All right, so let me go through a couple of examples here initially, then I'll come back to an overall process. Now, when we're creating a super timeline. Now, typically, this is the entire steps that you would need to do. You need to have your image. You have to extract your MFT to your local machine, run log to timeline against your MFT file, then mount your image, and then run log to timeline with the Windows XP preprocessor against that image, and then add it to your timeline CSV file. And then you start filtering your timeline. Now, a lot of you right now are saying, oh, Jesus, this is going to be a long process. I'm probably not going to be able to do that. Now, given the fact that this could be a very manual process, Kristen created a much simpler way of doing this, and that is the automated SIFT timeline creation that is automatically embedded inside the SIFT workstation. All you need to do to generate a timeline is know if it's a partition or a physical disk image, and run log to timeline -SIFT, give it your time zone, and then point it at your disk image. You press return, and everyone's happy. Let's start with this example only, and then we'll get to more complex examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll over to my SIFT workstation, and I have a pre-processed image. So let me show you my VMware machine. All right, so let me the image that I'm currently looking at here. All right. So I'm going to go back to a clean desktop. Now this, oops. The SIFT workstation, hold on a second, I'm getting a drink of water. All right. When you're running the log to timeline command, I first need to identify where my image is. My image is in this example, in my forensic challenge directory. It's a single DD image, but I can run this against an EO1 image if I wanted to. So all I do is run log to -SIFT. This is automatically built in the SIFT workstation. I'm going to give it my time zone, -Z, EST, 5 EDT, and I'm going to give it my, it's a partition image. So I say -P0, it's just label that for now. So it'll say, okay, this is a partition image. It'll run it against every partition, or treat it as a single partition. Otherwise, without the -P0, it'll automatically run it against all partitions, like the -I only. And then I'm going to give it my disk image, dblake.dd, and I simply press return. It's going to ask me a couple questions here. Waiting for it to catch up. Come on. Oh, it's already processing it. Well, I guess it's because of I didn't unmount my disk image all the way. It usually will ask me, I've noticed it's not mounted, would you like to mount it? And then I say yes, it'll automatically mount the image for you and then start processing the image. Notice that goes through and there's some data here that's pulling out. It says, looking for the default browser for the different users on this machine. It'll set the automatic host name for you. It'll automatically pull that out. It'll show you the time zone according to the registry. It'll show you what the default system browser is, and then it starts to give you any output errors that it's having. It wasn't able to open up specific files as it's cranking through your output. Does it work with file chunks, such as tablet devices will make raw images 4 GB chunks? SIFT does. If you go into the cheat sheet, and we don't have enough time to cover how to have this work correctly in every single iteration, but you can mount a chunked DD or a chunked EO1 image by using the command mount EWF or the command AFFuse. And that's on the cheat sheet. It'll show you how to point at usually the first one and the mount point. It'll automatically combine virtually and show you the raw disk image, and then you run log the timeline against the raw disk. I might have one in here. Let's see if I could show that. Let's see here if I do. All right, here's an example of a chunked EO1 image. It was EO1, EO2, EO3. Now in this example we want to be able to examine this within log the timeline. So what I would end up doing is I would create a mount point for this. Let's call this mount Windows mount. Actually no, mount EWF is very good. Mount Windows mount 2. So first create that directory. Then I use a command called mount ewf.py. This is going to mount. You point it at the first image, and you point it at the mount that's underneath the mount EWF directory, and you simply press return. It automatically mounts that into mount EWF. You see it into the mount EWF directory. You will see a single raw disk image now of your compressed EO1, EO2, EN3 that's combined and then compressed within the virtual space of the workstation. Now, once you're there, you run the timeline SIFT-Z EST5 EDT -P0 and then -I raw disk image. I'm not going to press return because I already have one already processing at this point. But those commands, again, are within the cheat sheet that's on your desktop. It's all under image mounting. Have an EO1 file, run this command. Have a split raw file, run this command. The raw file command works exact same way. And to show you that one, I have a example. Cases raw. And here we have the same image, IP case raw 001 all the way through 005. We do AFF use, and we point the first one, and we point this one at mount AFF. We'll accomplish the same thing for us. We CD into mount AFF, do a listing, and there would be our combined single raw image without having to do any additional work. And then you run log the time SIFT against that image, same way we did earlier. And I forgot to tell you that I know that this was a partition image, not a physical disk image. We'll support EX01 files in case version 7. No, I wish it did. We're not that cutting edge. I love the question, but no, I really wish it was that case. All right, so let me see how I'm doing on my processing of my other image here. Still cranking through here. So what I would like to do is I'm going to switch over to my, at the end here, where this is going to output this data to, by the way, is under cases directory on your SIFT workstation. You're going to see the automated timeline output to your timeline output folder. And if you go into this folder, you will see a CSV file that's going to be created here. And this is your xpdblake bodyfile.txt. Mine's still cranking through, so this is probably going to be still being created. Typically what I do here is I'll now run the L2T process against that file. This is our xpdblake bodyfile.txt, and I'm going to parse it only for a specific day. So we're going to do our month 01/16/2009, if that was the day in question, and I'm going to write my output for this to another directory called forensics challenge, and we'll just call this test.csv. And what that will do is just pull out the timeline for a specific day. Instead of all the days in question, it'll just run it for that one. Now notice here the question asks, there are 91 files, artifact entries that fall outside the scope of the date range. It shows signs of possible time stopping. Now the reason why this was detected is that it shows a file name timestamp occurs for one of the files in our date range occurs at either a future date or a date that's off of the date that's from our standard information one. It means the creation times for the files are not matched. It's actually the naturally occurring phenomenon, but it's also indicative of time stopping. So it creates a lot of false positives, but you can include them in your time line if you want to. Typically I don't, and just say no unless I'm doing a hacker case, and then it will show you how many entries were filtered, how many entries were removed, total number of process entries, and here's where, how many lines are going to be within that overall timeline at that point. Once I have my timeline, I'm going to switch over to my Excel spreadsheet, and I'll show you what this is going to look like in our Excel spreadsheet. I will open it up via my, start the application itself. So I'm going to share my entire desktop here to make this a little bit easier on us. So I'm going to go to my SIFT workstation directory under case. Sound back. So now I found the file test.csv under Cases Forensics Challenge, and I would simply open that up, and you'll see across the top here all of those entries that, if you look from the previous slide in the PDF, when you get to the PDF later, has a date, time, time zone all across the board here. But usually I'm going to hide the ones that are not important to me right now, which will leave the source. I'll do the source type, the type, the user and host. Usually my short description and version, I hide those. I have my file name and my inode, and that's it. I'll hide the rest. So all I will have here in the end is my inode number, my MST entry, my file name, the short entry, the source type, and that'd be it. Now, here's where I start doing some additional manipulation here when I'm working with this. Let me go back to the one that I've already created based off of this case to bring to make sure that we're all going to be staring at the same data. So remember I had my timeline raw that I was working with earlier that I wanted to show you. This is from that same timeline that we saw earlier, the one that was all colorized. The question is, Rob, how do you colorize it? How did you get to that point to be able to make it all look pretty when you are working with it? Well, it's actually easier than you think. And this, if you want to do some Excel magic here, here's some potential properties you could do to be able to increase your capabilities. First of all, this I will, under View, I'm going to freeze the top row. And I'm also going to make this a little bit larger so I could see the exact times, and I'm going to center it, just to make it a little bit easier for us to examine. Then I'm going to do a sort and filter. Where is it? Under Review, Data, Sort. No. Oh, wait a minute here. I'm looking for something I can't receive. View. Freeze. Things back at home. Yeah, we'll come back to conditional formatting here in a second. So we'll do sort and filter. All right, that's what I wanted to see. Okay, I wanted to do filter. And when you do a filter, instead of down here, just sort and filter and click filter, what it will do is in each of the columns, that if you do a drop down and you want to say, okay, I only want to see a specific source type. Let's say, for example, you're only interested in seeing user assist. So what I'll end up doing is I will select all, and then I'm only going to show only for my source type user assist entries. Then click OK. This will show me, in this case, all the evidence of execution within my timeline within my system here. Now notice the inode value for my is all can come from the same location, but this is the last execution time for Command Prompt, Internet Explorer, Skype, Skype EXE, WordPad, WinZip. So that's our execution history. Now, if we wanted to add to this, we could say what else ends up being evidence of execution. Well, that would include our prefetch. XP prefetch is right here. So we click OK. Now we add our prefetch to this mix. Again, we see our time and date stamps that are associated with this. But now we're able to see all of our prefetch files plus our user assist within a single output column. So if we're trying to do evidence of execution, you do the filtering and the sourcing in order to help yourselves out here trying to identify where there's a specific element that was executed. Now this basically becomes a very manual process, but it ends up really being useful to understand how to do quick filtration within Excel. I'm going to go back to showing everything again because I want to show you some interesting ways to make this more fun. So what if you wanted to automatically colorize some of the data that's in this output? Now this is where you do the conditional formatting, that you want to highlight cell rules and text that contains. So I'm going to highlight in the source type, conditional formatting, text that contain, and in this case I'm going to say text that contain prefetch, and I'm going to fill it with a custom format, and this will be whatever you pretty much want it to be. We'll do a fill of red with the font being color automatic. Let's do color as black, bold, and we click OK. Now when we do that, notice how it automatically creates anytime that you have a prefetch hit, it automatically colorize that as red. So now that you have that keyword in there that's going to be matched, this is how I start going through and creating a template for data associated with evidence of execution. So every time I see that source type, and I know user assist is another one, let's do another one, conditional formatting, text that contains. In this case we'll do user assist. We'll do the same formatting, custom format, fill will be red, font bold, and the color will be black. Click OK, and now all of a sudden we'll see all of our user assist values that will also show up for our data here. Now this gets us a little bit closer to where we saw earlier, where we see our final timeline here, where it's very easy to identify where things were executed and processed. So that's how you could use some simple Excel magic in order to take a raw timeline that you're looking at here and making it more easy to read. And usually I base it off of evidence of file opening, evidence of execution, evidence of USB key insertion, and I'll just simply colorize those as certain types, and then I immediately then go filter through and start filtering things out that I don't want to see as a result of it using the LT2 process. Let's do another couple of examples here of things that I've found in cases that have been extremely useful. Let me go back to my virtual machines. Now one of the ways that I found this is very useful is the historical program execution as a result of examining the restore points. Now restore point analysis has historically been extremely difficult to accomplish, mainly because when people are doing it, they have to manually go through there in order to pull out all of your time entries. What we're going to try and accomplish here is run log the timeline with one of the preprocessor modules against our system volume information, and then we're only going to add our keywords, user assist, run MRU, and prefetch in order to process the output from the overall system. Now in this case, here's how this will work. Let me go back to my virtual machines. In my virtual machines, I have a Windows XP system here that I'm going to analyze. So this Windows XP system has a tool that I use in order to remotely examine a machine during incident response, a tool called FResponse. So when I run FResponse, I'm going to simply run it against the IP address and start it. FResponse is basically going to share out the hard drive from the local machine, so it will show up as a remote hard drive on my SIFT workstation. So I simply start the subject dongle, then I'm going to go to my SIFT workstation, and I'm going to, in my other window here, after I plug my key in, go into the examiner location and run FResponse TACX there you go, -lin.exe. All right. So here, I see that there are two hard drives, and I want to be able to mount this hard drive locally. So I first need to, within the SIFT workstation, I'm going to run iscsi admin. That's to show you that you can do remote forensics against a machine using this as well. Node -- target name. For those of you who come to 508, you actually get FResponse as a part of the class. So we actually teach all this in depth in the class, what we're going through right here. And then I'm simply going to log into that box remotely. And now I should be able to see the remote disk, which is here. Let me mount my MNT window at this point. And I'm going to mount my read-only loopback show sys files, streams, interface equals Windows, and I'll put it dev std1 on our mount point. Now under my Windows mount point now, I should be able to see all of the normal files from that remote system that I'm looking at here from my SIFT workstation. So this is basically a live mounted my Windows XP machine via the FResponse tokens from one virtual machine to the other. Now the reason I wanted to show you that, because I already have prepped in the restore point location, there is a ton of restore points that are located in here. Now this is not a lot. For those of you who have done examinations before, you'll know there are possibly hundreds of restore points. And what I'm about to show you is something that I found quite useful in being able to say, well, I want to see the last time someone opened up a file every single day back from a restore point. Or I want to see the last time of execution for a specific program every single day that there is a restore point. Did he execute it last on that day? So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to run log the timeline against the restore point. Now I'm going to go out to create a directory, and we'll just call this restore point data, just to differentiate it. All right, so I'm going to restore point. Now I'm going to log the timeline. I'm going to recurse, and I'm going to run at the preprocessor -f when XP against, in the time zone in this case is EST5 EDT, and this is on the slide near the end where I'm creating this. And I simply, my mount point for this, system volume information, and that's where I'm going to start from. And I probably should make it even easier. I'll just give it my restore point directory. And I'm going to set my output file as cases restore points, and this will just call restore.csv. I press return. It's going to automatically start processing my just my restore point directory. So I don't care about anything else on the machine. I'm just wanting to analyze the restore point at this venture. And this is, the reason I'm showing you this, because this ends up being one of the largest problems that most people encounter is what's a simple tool I could use to not only process my own machine, but something as specific as a directory as large and as usually so complex that I can't go through every single one of those. Well, and again, if anyone's timing me here of what's going to occur when I examine this, every single one of those hives in the restore points is going to be processed, and then I'm going to run a post-processor, L2T process, in order to examine the output. Now, you could run the log the timeline recurse on a directory against any directory that you have. Let's say you extract all the index.dat files from the machine and you want to only examine those. You could do that, or shortcut files. You don't have to examine everything. So one of the big complaints about timeline analysis is that it captures too much. And with the filtering that you could do with L2T process, is in addition to the Excel colorizations that you could do, it makes it a lot easier to be able to identify the specific elements in question that you want to highlight. So someone had a question, sorry, is that the SIFT date and time? Tim, if you could ask that question again, what you mean by the SIFT date and time. And I'm not sure if I missed your question a while ago. I just saw it show up. Oh, I'm back on the spreadsheet. Oh no, that was the date and time from the UTC time from the system converted to Eastern Standard Time that was going on. Oh, no sound. Can you hear me now? All right. So while this is going on, let's go back to our the spreadsheet just to show what I mean by that. So I'll go through here and I'll show another couple of examples associated with this. For example, let's do conditional formatting. And what we'll do in this one is we'll focus in on the source type. In this case, we'll only do the recycle bin, actually deleted registry entries. So I'm only in deleted registry entries. Oh, that's something else that's automatically parsed by this, is if you have deleted registry entries, it'll show up here as well. And it'll show you what is deleted in the path from that. Notice that we have some software that was in here. I do want to colorize these. So one way I could do this is I can manually colorize these and say, okay, I want these to be full of black, and then let's make my text white. So that way when I refilter it, I'll be able to see when I'm scrolling up and down those specific entries. Another thing you could do if you don't like this, you could say, okay, I want to delete these from my specific source type. What if I want to do event logs? Again, some of these are fairly quick, so I could just go through here and colorize those. But that doesn't make it very much useful for us in the end, because let's say you want to create your own template, that's where the conditional formatting really comes into play. So I look at what the type is, I copy the type, and then I go back to my source type, conditional formatting, highlight the cells, text that contain, in this case, event log, and we'll do a custom format for this, fill, let's make these light blue, and click OK. Yes. Oh, hold on. You can't see this. Show spreadsheet. Oh, my bad. Thank you. I thought I was sharing my entire desktop. Thank you for letting me know that. All right, so here's what I just did there. Yeah, I'll go back to what I just did again. While the thing is still cooking, while it's going through there, and it may be done here at this point. Nope, it's still cranking through it. So we'll go back to my spreadsheet here while that's working. So in our example here, how did you do better filtration? All right, is that you would have to go back, and I'll do the deleted ones first. So I go back to select all, and I'm only interested in deleted registry values. So I clicked on deleted registry values, and what I simply did was, if you just want to quickly colorize this, all I did was do a fill value, and then I changed my text to whatever I wanted it to be. So that way when I go back to my overall timeline, and I'm selecting all the values, I would be able to see where, if I'm scrolling up and down, where that one key was deleted. Now why that would be specifically useful, let's just search for that in the source type. Let's assume this deleted registry is associated with the execution of another program. and you might be able to see that as a result of examining your output specifically via your the tool that we're examining here. And let me hide this column again so it's very easy to see. Now let's do another one. Let's just assume that we want to examine just our Internet Explorer web history. So here we see for Internet Explorer just our web history associated with anyone that went to a specific website, and you would see that website that's going to be hit here. But that's just, again, through the filtration mechanisms that you could just do your web history. You could just do web history and deleted registry. If you want to do web history, deleted registry, and user assist and execution, you'd be able to add just those source values into your timeline just using standard spreadsheet manipulation in order to show only what you want to see. And using conditional formatting will help you out there. Now, one of the things that I hope to do in my copious amounts of free time is I want to create a generic template that already has a lot of the stuff built into it. So you could have a color code, you dump your data from your wherever created it into the template, have it automatically process it, and so it automatically colorizes things by what artifact type it is, from program execution, file opening, knowledge of programs, opening of folders like shellbags entries. So you could manually scan because it's much easier to visualize this than it is to do anything else. And then based off of that, you can actually create timeline, graphs of when did events happen. And you could potentially create a graph that says, I want to know where there's a massive amount of system activity on a specific point in time during a day, and then zoom in on that. Now you can clearly see where this is going to be built into a larger tool in the end that says, okay, this is still way too manual. Could you still GUIize it to make it a little bit cleaner than using Excel? Clearly, yes. And that's where we're ended up going to be heading. But in the meantime, don't struggle too much on, hey, this is too much data. Using the, just to show you where that is again, under the sort and filter, all you have to do is click on filter, and it'll automatically create these drop downs for you. And if there's value in them that's of interest, and you can sense all these different files and, for example, that we're going to be able to see out of it, it'll automatically show up from that one column, specific file names. Typically what I find is the source type is usually a good column to start at when you're trying to examine things. Now, for example, the mount points to key is generally associated with a USB keys insertion last date and time. So we want to see that to the mix. We would add that as well, and we could scroll up to the top where those were potentially entered into the mix. So here's where we end up seeing that. Where are they? Mount points to. Here's the two keys here associated with a USB key insertion that occurred at 1824, around 1824 at that point. You can expand that from that point to see which specific USB keys have been inserted, but you're getting the idea is that you mainly use manipulation of source type to help you out filter what you're looking at. But the key here is understanding that you need to know that the mount points to is associated with USB key entry. That you need to know what the data is from the recent docs key. So for example, take a look at the recent docs key. Click on this. It says recently opened files of secret.zip, work.ipl, and Tiva research. So this is when the last time of opening from the registry file, in this case into user.dat file. All right, so let's go back to our SIFT workstation and see if this is actually done processing here. Still cranking through it, it looks like, which is sad. I'd hoped to have actually had this done. Let's see if we have any data in that output folder. Okay, so we do have data in the output folder here. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up from my Windows machine, even though it's still cranking through. So just to open it up raw on our machine, it's downloading the restore point data, and there's a ton of it. Because basically you have 9 different registry hives. They're all being processed for all of their last write times. It's almost too much data. So what I'm going to end up doing is instead of opening up the entire thing, I'm going to do a little bit of filtration here prior to opening it up, and this is back on my SIFT workstation. So one of the ways I could do that is I'm going to first keyword list. And this is another way to help you with filtration. Say if you wanted to do it before you input it within your spreadsheet. Now in this case, I'm going to simply add user assist, prefetch, run MRU, and then last visited MRU. This is all the evidence of execution keywords that we have from it. And it could occur anywhere in any of the lines. It doesn't really matter where. It won't matter if it's in a different column. That's all the main point here is we're just creating a generic keyword list that we're going to be examining. Now going back to our example, we'll do LT2 process, and I'm going to give it my, in this case, my restore point CSV file, give it my keyword.txt file, and I'm going to then my filtered timeline. This is just my restore point data again. Building keyword list, done. I'm just going to crank through this. I'm going to go ahead and kill this for now. Just increase my speed on my other side. So build the keyword list, and then it's going to crank through the data, and it'll output into the filtered timeline CSV file. In this case, it'll show the historical evidence of execution across multiple days for like regedit. Say we're looking for how often regedit was opened. All right. So we ended up total number of events that pulled in the filter 213. All right, that's cool. So let's go over to my window here, open up filtered CSV file. Notice immediately how it is easily able to be processed. So let me do a couple of manipulation here to hide the data that I really don't need. So I'll go here, hide the short entry, description, version, I need the file name, notes, format, extra, hide those. All right. Oops, format, extra, hide. So here I'm going to expand out my file name. That's easier to read. Shortcut to type. Shortcut type here. Shortcut link files. Notice a lot of the stuff is in it. Shows a ton of information that's associated with it. So now that we're here, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to do some filtration off the top. Let me freeze the top row. Make this a little bit bigger so we could all see, okay, what are the different columns and what they mean. Make them bold. Center it, go to sort and filter, click filtration, go back over to the right side. The only source types I'm interested in are user assist, the run MRU key, and the regedit key. Say we're only interested in any type of programs that are executed. Now look at the dates and times that are associated with this. And here, let's even filter down, go back to the short entry. Let's assume we're only interested in a specific value at this point. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to unselect everything. I'm only going to be interested in the run path of regedit. Assume this is the execution history for regedit on the system. So going back in time on my machine, based off the restore points, I see regedit was executed 922, 923, 926, and 1026. Now if I wanted to add more data in there, let's assume that we wanted to see how often I run my FResponse tactical dongle on my machine. Let's add in here command prompt, calc, notepad, because those are always fun to do. I have to do a little bit of searching here. And there's my FResponse tax.exe. So historical runs of all these. And again, if this is of interest to you, you can see that I ran my command prompts at 8/30/2011. That's the last time of execution on that day for the cmd.exe. But I've executed the command prompt multiple times on my machine, notepad multiple times, regedit multiple times, and that's just all focusing in on only a specific key. What if we wanted to see how many times we open up a specific document file type? So we wanted to see Going back to a clear filter from source type. After I do the filtration, you have to go back to the beginning. Make sure you always save your original, but let me see if we go back to. All right, let's go back to sort and filter. We go back to short entries. Let's go to just recent docs. That's always interesting too. Nope. Long column. Let's go to source type. I didn't include the recent docs in this filter, but let's assume we want to do shortcut files, for example. Anytime we see a shortcut file that's in here, we'd be able to see again, there's multiple shortcut files, and again, this is the target data for that shortcut file of when it was last run. And Windows Media Player apparently in our restore points, it has multiple shortcut files that are going to be found in there. So it processes all this type of data, and it's just a matter of figuring out what is the best way to do the filtration. In one way, it makes it a lot easier to do the total colorization, like we're doing in one of the earlier ones, like you see for the final result here. But when I'm initially working with the timeline, I'm usually doing a lot of filtration from my window using L2T process to filter only the elements that I want, or alternatively, I'll only look at using an Excel spreadsheet and doing the filtration options in here with conditional formatting, highlighting specific values of interest. What about forensics on a Mac computer? Great question. Mobile devices, all this. You can clearly see the benefit of timeline analysis. Creating it is actually fairly easy. And I'll go back to my slides just to do a quick review of that. But creating it's fairly easy to do. This analysis feature that we're currently looking at here ends up being fairly intensive. And right now we're focusing, unfortunately, if you're looking for Mac forensics, a lot on only Windows-based artifacts. What we need people to do, and I'm always trying to recruit, if you have interest of that in helping us create artifact analyzers for Mac artifacts, that will greatly help us. Going back, and I'll show you where it's in the slides to show you this, when you look at some of the artifacts that are in here, we actually already have some of them built. Safari, PS list files, already in there because we've seen Safari on multiple systems. There is Firefox. Again, you'll potentially be able to use those. So if you're able to mount it, some of these things will automatically be able to pull out the data from, but we still need additional research for additional artifacts that are found only on those operating systems in question. Another question, have you used Super Timeline in court testimony? I have not been called to testify to Super Timeline data. Generally what I do is this is a tool that points me to the artifact, and I have used the tool to say, here's where the media analysis is, in USB key forensics, that we have been in a very major case. When was the device plugged in? We were initially alerted to the device via the Super Timeline, but it was through the actual media analysis of that device that they focused in on more, which this only is a pointer of a structure to data to know when things potentially generally occurred. I still recommend if there's a smoking gun related element, you still have to go in and do proper media analysis using FTK in doing the deeper dive analysis of that specific artifact. Like you're seeing in your overall final timeline, which I usually assign to a report, then usually that might be presented in part of a case report, but generally there's multiple different facts that are established as a result of overlapping data that actually comes out of timeline analysis. So long run, the answer there is yes and no. Not directly if someone says, have you used Super Timeline in court? Mainly they're focusing in on the artifacts that the Super Timeline pointed us to, and it's mainly like a map, not that points us to a location, but you still have to go to that location and still dig around a little bit closer as to what does this actually tell us. All timeline analysis does is dumps the puzzle pieces onto the table. It doesn't solve your case for you. Another question. Do you parse pull from the setup API log file? Yes, the setup API log file is one of the log files that is parsed. All the event log files, EVT, EVTX, are parsed to do this automatically. Deleted registry keys should be a part of this list as well. It wasn't listed here. I need to add that. Another question. before I wrap up. All right, so let's go and wrap up. Just a reminder how we do this. If you're looking to start with timeline analysis, this is a lot in here. What I generally recommend that you do is that you start with downloading the SIFT workstation, taking a DD image that you have, and simply running log-to-timeline-SIFT against it. Once you have your initial timeline output, which will be found in this output folder, I would then recommend that you go back and open it up in Excel, and using your guide here, only show these specific columns. Once you've accomplished that, then you could either do the filtration via Excel or using the L2T process to do your filtration for you prior to you actually opening up in Excel. So if you're only looking for any file name with the word confidential or secret, for example, you can say, okay, I know that's our keyword list, so I want to show all the files that have that as a part of the keyword or part of the output data. Maybe you're looking for an email address or a website that have been visited. You could use any of your keyword lists in here and use that to automatically filter down to just the core data that you're after. Once you get fairly comfortable saying, okay, I'm getting how timeline works, then you can move on to using the manual timeline creation, saying, I just want to do restore point analysis, for example. And I use this in cases in which I'm trying to do historical, how often was this file opened? When and how often was this program executed? For example, privacy cleaners, how often did the individual execute the privacy cleaner after it had been installed? Was this daily? Can we prove that it was him? Was it manually executed? The way things are executed via user assist, it means that someone manually clicked on it. This is not like a scheduled event that occurred, it was automated at that point. It's because you can tell the difference between automated and manual user execution, just by looking at some of the values that are in there. This does, just to review, if you're not 100% sure on what all the artifacts mean, I highly recommend that you come back and take our artifact analysis class in Windows Forensics in Depth, really get that solid knowledge, because we actually create the manual timeline that you saw earlier with those colors from that class. Then you move on to automated timeline generation once you have the core skills done. So just to remember, you need to have a firm understanding of file system artifacts, Windows artifacts, and registry artifacts. And I do recognize I went through this fairly quickly. We spend a full day plus on focusing on file system data as well as how all these artifacts integrated into each other in order to create our overall timelines. And we spend almost a full day plus just on timeline analysis and generation within our 508 course. I know, again, just in 2 hours we covered a lot here. If you have questions, I'm going to put my email address into the room here, and I'm very willing to help out. Just obviously give me a couple days if I don't answer back. If you start utilizing the tool, I highly recommend download it, play on a case that you've already worked with. Maybe you already know the data from it because you manually pulled it out, and then see what the output is for that day. It'll greatly help you out when you're doing this type of analysis. Now I saw a couple of questions here that are here. What about Vista and Windows 7 shadow copy modules? Yes, working on it. How often is SIFT updated? I'm updating it about once a quarter. I have a bug fix update that I'm working on, so expect one out by Christmas. And then also additional questions. I think it would be good to have input modules for authentication logs to identify who is actually using the computer. Well, this, Laura, it's interesting that you can actually show that based off of the nt-user .dat hive as well as the event logs if auditing is turned on. You could pinpoint to the user that was using the computer, probably not down to the actual human being. I could always say, okay, I know it was this user. How do I know it wasn't someone else posing as a user? Well, that's where timeline analysis can actually help out there too, is that profiling a user's habits is a lot easier using timeline analysis. For example, are you a Firefox or Internet Explorer user? Which websites do you visit on a daily basis? What if someone new sits down and they use different programs or in a different order? Typically human beings are very habitual, and you can actually tell their habits. Like I said, that restore point analysis, when was the last time you executed a program on a daily basis? What files are opened up? If you start doing heuristics across that, where are the commonalities, you could actually see where someone else, when they use the machine, is not going to be sitting within the fairway of what the actual utilization is normally. And it requires a lot of work, but again, it's possible. I've actually shown and had 2 different users on a machine. One user uses it every day. I said, try to stay within the bounds of what you typically do. And then I had someone else get on the machine and start poking around, going visit a couple websites, and you could clearly tell, even though it was the same user, it was completely different profile that the user never touched these programs. All of a sudden, were they now being executed? The shell bags module is also being created to show evidence of folder opening. So that's another one that will be out shortly. If you are out there and you need a module created, also email me because there's some coders out there that says, well, I'd like to do this, I just don't know what to do it on. So if you actually have requests, please let us know, because actually every now and then I'll get someone who says, hey, I'm bored. Do you know if anyone has a module that needs to be researched? I'm like, actually, I got one the other day, and someone will potentially create it and dump it into the project. And so that, especially if it's case related, it's easy if you're working on a case saying, hey, listen, I have a case, it's a very important case, I can't tell you what it's about, but bad people will be put in jail. Volunteers will step up and they'll do it. You just reach out to us and let us know how we could potentially support and make some of these things happen. Also, the 10% discount, Coins 10, if you want to take do any of the SANS community events that you see here on this slide. And I'm not sure if it's limited to this event, but again, ask that as a question for the details as we're closing out here. But I want to show my email address here at the end. If you have any additional questions or you would like additional information on this or the courses and what they cover, email me. I'll gladly point you in the right way. Again, I know this is a lot of data to potentially worry about within this 2-hour segment. Try it. Get some experience on it. It'll be frustrating initially, but for the individuals that I've started using this, especially on the law enforcement side, they don't know how they lived without timeline analysis after they start doing it. And every single time, so 95% of the people will say they used it on a case and it uncovered things they didn't know existed. And they were just, they had nothing but good things to say about it. And that's why this is going to really energize a lot of digital forensics out there. My name's Rob Lee. I'm with the SANS Institute, and without any other questions, thank you for joining tonight. Appreciate everyone showing up.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan and Rob, for your presentation and for bringing this content to our community. To our audience, we really appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back for our next SANS webcast.